Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. February 1945. A research facility outside Wrocław, Poland. 40 dead scientists, 0 radiation, and in the sub-basement, something that shouldn't exist. 3 American soldiers made contact with a device the Nazis didn't build. They excavated it. From rock formations 200 million years old, now those men are trapped between moments, aging backwards, existing everywhere at once, dying, but never dead. The government calls it temporal displacement syndrome. The files call it contagion, and the infection is spreading. This is Warborn Stories, where classified nightmares become declassified truth. The official record states that OSS Captain William Hatcher's unit encountered no significant resistance when they entered the underground research facility 7 kilometers outside Wrocław on February 14, 1945. The official record is incomplete. What the after-action report fails to mention is that Hatcher's radio man vomited twice before reaching the main entrance, that Sergeant Dutch Kohler's Geiger counter registered 0 radiation despite every surface being warm to the touch, or that the facility's massive steel doors stood open, unlocked from the inside. I know this because I spent 3 years with the documents that shouldn't exist. The ones kept in a filing cabinet at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Building 18B, Sub-Level 4. The ones stamped Magic Eyes only in red ink that hasn't faded in 80 years. Hatcher wrote everything down, every detail, every measurement, every symptom. He died in 1962 at Walter Reed, his medical file sealed under national security protocols. But his field journal survived, passed from classified project to classified project, until it landed on my desk with a yellow sticky note that read, "Recommend permanent disposal." I didn't dispose of it. The facility had been evacuated in a hurry. Hatcher's entry from February 14th describes papers scattered across workstations, half-eaten meals in the canteen, a phonograph still spinning a blank record. 40 bodies, all German nationals, all scientists based on their clothing, and the equations covering every chalkboard. The medical officer, Lieutenant Raymond Voss, examined the first corpse and immediately recognized acute radiation syndrome, the subcutaneous hemorrhaging, the destroyed bone marrow, the organ liquefaction. Except Voss had worked at Oak Ridge. He knew what radiation poisoning looked like when you measured it against what radiation actually does. Stay safe out there. These men had been poisoned by something that left no trace, no contamination, no residual particles. The Geiger counter remained silent even when Voss held it against exposed tissue. One scientist, identified later as Dr. Ernst Kessler, had been found with a pencil still in his hand, mid-calculation. The equation on the wall beside him dealt with relativistic time dilation. The math was beyond anything Voss understood, but he recognized the symbol for tau, proper time. Kessler had been calculating something about time itself when his organs began to dissolve. Hatcher ordered a full sweep. The facility descended 4 levels into the bedrock, each level more austere than the last. Electric light still functioned. The air tasted of ozone and copper. Private First Class James Yates reported hearing a low-frequency hum that made his teeth ache, though when Hatcher listened, he heard nothing. By the time they reached Sub-Level 4, 3 men had requested permission to return to the surface. Hatcher denied the request. Whatever had happened here, whatever had killed 40 scientists without leaving a radiation signature, existed in the lowest level. He could feel it the way you feel a thunderstorm building. The sub-basement stretched 50 meters across, a perfect circle carved from solid granite. In the center, suspended by steel cables anchored to the ceiling, hung a bell-shaped device approximately 4 meters tall and 3 meters in diameter. The surface appeared metallic, but reflected no light. It absorbed illumination, drank it, made the surrounding space feel darker than it should. Hatcher approached slowly. The device emitted a sound, not heard but felt, a vibration that traveled through bone rather than air. Staff Sergeant Robert Wang, the unit's photographer and demolitions expert, began taking pictures. Standard protocol for any recovered enemy technology. His camera was a Graflex speed graphic, reliable military issue. He shot 12 plates in rapid succession, bracketing exposures, capturing the device from multiple angles. When he developed them 3 hours later in the makeshift darkroom they established in the facility's administrative building, every photograph showed the bell in a different position. Not blurred, not double exposed. Physically different positions within the suspension cables, as if it had moved between shots despite remaining stationary the entire time Wang photographed it. Hatcher examined the German documentation with their translator, Corporal Ava Zimmermann, whose family had fled Berlin in 1936. The technical notes referenced Project Kronos. The scientists had been attempting to create what they called controlled temporal displacement through the manipulation of electromagnetic fields at frequencies that should not exist. One report, dated February 10th, described successful dilation of the local time field by 0.003 seconds. Another, dated February 13th, one day before Hatcher's arrival, simply read, "Membrane breach confirmed, causality violation observed, recommend immediate shutdown." There was no February 14th entry. February 13th had been the last day anyone wrote anything. Private First Class. Michael Torres touched it first, not deliberately. He stumbled while examining the cable anchor points, caught himself against the bell's surface. The metal felt warm, alive. He pulled his hand away and stared at his palm. Hatcher asked if he was injured. Torres said no, but his eyes had changed, not the color. The depth, like looking into water that goes down farther than it should. Sergeant Wang touched it next, deliberately this time, pressing his entire palm against the curved surface. He stood there for 11 seconds. Hatcher timed it before stepping back. When asked what he felt, Wang responded in flawless German, a language he had never studied, describing the sensation as außerhalb der Zeit, outside of time. Then he blinked and asked why everyone was staring at him. He had no memory of speaking German. He did not believe them when they told him he had. Private Yates was the third. He rested his forehead against the bell's apex, eyes closed for nearly a minute. When Hatcher ordered him to step away, Yates turned and asked, in perfect seriousness, what year it was. Told it was 1945, he laughed. He said he remembered 1945. He also remembered 1887, 1634, and 2003. He remembered dying at Antietam. He remembered the Spanish flu. He remembered things that had not happened yet, would not happen for decades, spoken with the calm certainty of recalled experience. Hatcher ordered the device photographed again, documented, and left undisturbed. He sealed Sub-Level 4, posted guards, and sent an encrypted message to OSS headquarters in London, requesting immediate technical support and scientific personnel. The response came back within 6 hours. Maintain quarantine. Await extraction team. Discuss with no one. The message was signed with a code designation Hatcher did not recognize. Majestic. The symptoms began that night. Torres aged backwards, not rapidly, not dramatically, but his hands, when he held them in the firelight, looked younger than they had that morning. Smoother. The scar from a childhood knife wound had faded to nothing. Wang spoke in languages, Latin, ancient Greek, something that might have been Sumerian, describing events he could not possibly know. The fall of Constantinople, the construction of Göbekli Tepe. He wept, describing the burning of the Library of Alexandria as if he had been there, as if he had smelled the smoke. Yates aged forward. In 3 days he developed crow's feet, gray hair at his temples, the stiffness of early arthritis. He talked about his grandchildren, showed Hatcher photographs of children who did not exist. He knew their names, their birthdays. He described memories of a future that might never occur, spoken with the absolute confidence of someone remembering childhood. The extraction team arrived February 18th. 12 men in unmarked uniforms, led by a man who introduced himself only as Dr. Fairchild. They wore no rank insignia. They carried instruments Hatcher had never seen. Fairchild examined the 3 affected men, took blood samples, performed neurological tests. He asked each man to describe what they remembered. He recorded everything. Then he turned to Hatcher and said very quietly that the bell was not a weapon. It was a penetration device. The Germans had punctured something, a membrane between when and when. Now it was leaking. Fairchild's team dismantled the bell over 4 days, working in 6-hour shifts, never touching it directly, using tools that measured things Hatcher did not understand. When they finished, the device was crated and removed under armed convoy. Hatcher never saw it again. The 3 affected men were transferred to an undisclosed medical facility. Their service records were amended to show administrative discharge for medical reasons. Hatcher received orders reassigning him to occupied Japan, effective immediately. Before he left, he asked Fairchild what would happen to Torres, Wang, and Yates. Fairchild lit a cigarette and watched the convoy disappear into the February snow. He said that the men were experiencing temporal displacement syndrome, a condition that had no cure because it was not a disease. They were unstuck, existing in multiple moments simultaneously. The bell had not poisoned them with radiation, it had poisoned them with time itself. Hatcher asked if they would recover. Fairchild exhaled smoke and said that recovery implied returning to a previous state. These men no longer had a previous state. They existed in all states simultaneously now, past, present, future. The only mercy was that they would forget which one was real. The last entry in Hatcher's journal, dated February 23, 1945, consisted of a single question written in capital letters. What else did they find? The facility that does not officially exist sits 17 miles northeast of Mercury, Nevada, accessible only by unmarked road through restricted airspace. No designation on any map, no budget line in any congressional record. The men who built it in 1952 signed documentation that legally erased their involvement. When they died, and all of them did die, most before retirement age, their death certificates listed causes that medical science would call improbable. Acute organ failure in otherwise healthy 30-year-olds. Spontaneous cerebral hemorrhaging. One man's autopsy revealed a heart that had aged 60 years while the rest of his body remained 42. I found the facility's existence referenced in a single document, a 1968 memorandum from the Defense Intelligence Agency to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, subject line Kronos Material Disposition. The memo had been misfiled, buried in a box of Vietnam-era logistics reports at the National Archives. It should not have been declassified. Someone had made a mistake, or more likely, someone had wanted it found. The memo described ongoing containment protocols for items recovered from Operation Paperclip acquisitions, specifically materials exhibiting temporal anomalies incompatible with standard storage procedures. 3 men, Torres, Wang, and Yates. The memo mentioned them by name, which violated every classification protocol. It stated they remained under medical observation at Site 17, that their condition had not improved, and that 2 additional personnel had been exposed during routine examination. The memo recommended permanent isolation and cessation of all direct contact. It was signed by someone whose name had been redacted so thoroughly that the paper showed white rectangles where ink had been chemically removed. I made inquiries, carefully, through channels that still owed me favors from my years with the Defense Intelligence Agency's Special Access Programs Office. A retired Air Force colonel, who I will not name, met me at a diner outside Nellis Air Force Base. He ordered black coffee and did not touch it. When I mentioned Site 17, His expression did not change, but his hands moved from the table to his lap. He told me that asking questions about Site 17 was how careers ended, not through official reprimand, through accidents, reassignments to positions that did not exist, medical retirements for conditions that appeared suddenly and progressed rapidly. He also told me that Site 17 still operated, that the three men were still there, that in 80 years they had not aged normally, had not died, and had not stopped experiencing time in ways that violated causality. Then he stood, left $40 on the table for a $5 coffee, and said that if I valued my pension, I would forget I had ever heard those names. I did not forget. I found Dr. Vance instead. Vance had worked at Site 17 from 1991 to 1994, listed officially as a psychological consultant for Department of Energy facilities in Nevada. Her actual role, discovered through cross-referencing her published research on dissociative disorders with gaps in her employment history, involved evaluating personnel exposed to classified materials. She had resigned abruptly, moved to Maine, and spent the next 30 years publishing papers on temporal lobe epilepsy and false memory syndrome. Her research obsessively circled the question of whether memory could exist independent of linear time. She agreed to meet me in person, once. She chose a park in Portland, public and open, where conversations could not be recorded without obvious equipment. She was 73 years old and looked exhausted in a way that transcended physical tiredness. When I mentioned Torres, Wang, and Yates, she closed her eyes for a long moment before asking how I knew those names. I told her about Hatcher's journal, about the memorandum, about the colonel's warning. She said, "They're still alive, all three, and they shouldn't be." And Vance described Site 17 as a medical facility designed around impossibilities. The three men occupied separate wings, isolated from each other and from staff except during scheduled observations. Standard protocols required all personnel to limit exposure to 15-minute intervals, never alone, always with at least one observer remaining outside the containment area. These were not radiation protocols. These were contagion protocols for something that spread through proximity and perception. Torres had continued aging in reverse. By 1991, Vance said, he appeared to be in his early 20s despite being biologically 76 years old. His memories moved backward through his life, losing recent decades while gaining perfect recall of childhood, infancy, even what he described as pre-birth awareness. He spoke about his own birth from his mother's perspective. He remembered things that had not happened to him but to his ancestors, genetic memories surfacing as his personal timeline unwound. He knew details about his great-grandfather's life in Mexico that no record could verify, but that later research confirmed. The medical staff documented everything. Blood samples showed cellular structures that aged in reverse under microscopic observation. Tissue biopsies revealed mitochondrial activity that ran backward, cells producing energy by absorbing entropy rather than releasing it. Torres was not simply growing younger. He was experiencing time's arrow in reverse, his biology moving against the universal flow of causality. Wang existed in all moments simultaneously. When Vance interviewed him, he responded to questions she had not yet asked and answered inquiries she would ask in subsequent sessions. He described her childhood in detail, the car accident when she was 7, the surgery, the scar on her left knee, information she had never disclosed to anyone at Site 17. He knew because, from his perspective, she had already told him, would tell him, was telling him. Verb tenses lost meaning in his presence. The most disturbing aspect, Vance explained, was that Wang's condition appeared to be spreading, not biologically, conceptually. Personnel who spent extended time with Wang began experiencing minor temporal dislocations, déjà vu that proved accurate. Dreams of conversations that occurred the following day. A nurse reported remembering her own death, a car accident in 2003, with such vivid clarity that she requested immediate transfer. The accident occurred exactly as she remembered, 9 years after she left Site 17. She survived because she knew it was coming and took a different route home. Yates had aged normally until approximately 1978, when he reached what appeared to be his natural death age. Then he stabilized. His body remained 83 years old, declining no further, dying no faster. He existed in a state of perpetual terminal illness, always hours from death, never dying. His memories extended forward. He described events from 2020, from 2050, from centuries ahead. He knew the names of Vance's grandchildren, told her their birth dates, warned her about her grandson's heart condition, information she verified 20 years later when her daughter gave birth. But Yates also contradicted himself. He described multiple futures, contradictory timelines, events that could not all occur. He remembered nuclear war in 1987 and peace treaties in 1986. He remembered the Soviet Union collapsing and the Soviet Union enduring into the 2040s. Vance realized he was not predicting one future. He was remembering all possible futures, every branching timeline simultaneously, unable to distinguish between what would happen and what might happen. She asked him once, during her final week at Site 17, if he knew when he would die. Yates smiled and said he had already died. In 1978, in 2034, in 1887 at Antietam, a battle he had never fought in a war that ended before his birth. He said death was not a moment but a probability wave, and he existed in all states of that wave simultaneously. He was dead and alive, and had never been born, all true, all happening now. Vance left Site 17 3 days later. She submitted her resignation, citing personal reasons, and was debriefed by personnel who made it clear that discussing her work would violate national security statutes carrying criminal penalties. She signed the documentation. She never spoke about it publicly. But her research, every paper she published for 3 decades, circled the same conclusion. Human consciousness might not be bound to linear time. Trauma, neurological damage, or exposure to certain stimuli might untether awareness from the present moment. She never mentioned the bell, never referenced Project Kronos. But reading her work, understanding what she had witnessed, the implication was clear. The German scientists had not built a weapon or a time machine. They had built a device that punctured the membrane, separating consciousness from causality. And once punctured, the wound did not heal. I asked Vance if the 3 men were still at Site 17. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as profound sorrow, and said, "Where else would they be? They can't leave. Not because of security protocols, because leaving implies moving from one moment to another. They don't move through moments anymore. They exist in all of them." Before we parted, she gave me a name, Dr. Robert Klein. He had been the medical director at Site 17 from 1981 to 2007. He had overseen the long-term study of temporal displacement syndrome, and according to Vance, he had made a discovery that ended his career and nearly ended his life. She wrote his last known address on a napkin and slid it across the table. Then she said very quietly, "Be careful. The bell is still active. They moved it from Wrocław, but they never shut it down. They can't. It's not a machine you turn off, it's a door that was opened, and doors, once opened to places like that, don't close just because you want them to." Dr. Robert Klein lived in a single wide trailer outside Tonopah, Arizona, surrounded by 40 acres of desert and nothing else. No neighbors, no visible road access except a dirt track that disappeared into scrub brush. When I arrived unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon in March, he was sitting on a folding chair outside his trailer, watching the horizon through binoculars. He did not turn when my rental car approached. He simply said, loud enough for me to hear as I stepped out, "You're either very brave or very stupid. Either way, you shouldn't be here." Klein was 78 years old and looked older, not from age but from exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. His hands trembled constantly, a fine motor tremor that never stopped. When I introduced myself and mentioned Site 17, he lowered the binoculars and studied me with an expression that mixed resignation and something close to relief. He said, "I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Took longer than I thought. Come inside. We don't have much time." The trailer's interior contradicted its exterior. Banks of monitors lined one wall, displaying what appeared to be seismographic data, electromagnetic field measurements, and temporal graphs I did not understand. A wall of filing cabinets consumed the opposite side, each drawer labeled with alphanumeric codes. The air smelled of ozone and stale coffee. Klein gestured to a chair and poured 2 cups from a pot that looked days old. He did not offer cream or sugar. He simply said, "Vance sent you, or you found her, doesn't matter. You know about Torres, Wang, and Yates. Now you need to know about the others." I asked what others. Klein pulled a file from the nearest cabinet. Inside were medical records, photographs, and incident reports spanning 60 years. He spread them across a folding table with the practiced efficiency of someone who had reviewed these documents thousands of times. The first photograph showed a woman, approximately 30 years old, with red hair and a laboratory coat. The caption read, "Dr. Elizabeth Marsh, Site 17 medical staff, exposed November 1979. Marsh performed a routine examination on Wang," Klein explained. "Standard protocol, 15 minutes, 1 observer outside the containment area. But Wang was having what we called a temporal episode, speaking in multiple timelines simultaneously, answering questions from conversations that hadn't happened yet." Marsh asked him a question about his symptoms. Wang responded with information about Marsh's future, specific, verifiable details about events 3 years ahead. A car accident, her sister's wedding, her father's death from pancreatic cancer. Marsh documented the conversation in her report and thought nothing more of it until the predictions began manifesting. The car accident occurred exactly as Wang described, her sister's wedding, down to the specific dress and venue. When her father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 1982, Marsh requested immediate transfer from Site 17. The request was denied. By then, she had begun experiencing temporal dislocations herself, minor at first, remembering conversations before they occurred, knowing what people would say seconds before they spoke. Then, the dislocations intensified. "She started existing in multiple moments," Klein said, sliding another photograph across the table. This one showed Marsh in a hospital bed, restrained, her eyes open but unfocused. By 1984, she couldn't distinguish between now and then. She would respond to people who weren't in the room, because from her perspective, they were there, had been there, would be there. We isolated her, treated her the same way we treated Wang, but her condition progressed faster. Within 2 years, she stopped responding to external stimuli entirely. She was conscious, but her consciousness existed across so many simultaneous moments that the present became just one thread in an infinite tapestry. Marsh died in 1991. Cause of death listed as catastrophic neurological failure. But Klein had been present when it happened. He said her brain had not failed, it had simply stopped being able to process linear existence. The autopsy revealed neural pathways that should not exist, synaptic connections forming patterns that suggested her neurons had been communicating with themselves across time, creating feedback loops that spanned decades. The file contained 17 more cases, personnel who had experienced prolonged exposure to Torres, Wang, or Yates, security officers who developed the ability to remember events hours before they occurred, a janitor who aged backwards for 3 months before his condition stabilized, A psychologist who began speaking in languages that had not been invented yet, describing technological concepts and historical events from centuries in the future. "This is temporal contagion," Klein said. "We didn't understand it at first, thought we could contain it through physical isolation. But time is not physical. It's conceptual, consciousness-dependent. The bell didn't just affect the 3 men who touched it. It affected the space around them, the localized temporal field, and that field expanded." I asked if it was still expanding. Klein nodded slowly and pulled up data on one of his monitors. The screen displayed a map of Nevada with concentric circles radiating from a point northeast of Mercury. Site 17 sits at the epicenter. The temporal distortion field has been growing at approximately 3 centimeters per year since 1952. Sounds slow, negligible. But we're talking about a radius that now extends 4.6 meters from the original containment area. In another century, it will encompass the entire facility. In 500 years, it could reach populated areas. He showed me incident reports from nearby towns, unexplained phenomena. A woman in Alamo who claimed to remember her own death in a car accident that had not yet occurred, and then died, exactly as she remembered 2 weeks later. A family in Rachel experiencing collective déjà vu, entire conversations replaying verbatim hours after they first occurred. Livestock exhibiting impossible behaviors, cows giving birth to calves that aged backwards, dying as embryos. "The government knows," Klein said. "They've known for decades. There's a protocol, Cascade Protocol, initiated if the temporal field expands beyond containable parameters. It involves a thermonuclear device buried 300 meters beneath Site 17, not to destroy the bell. You can't destroy something that exists in multiple time streams simultaneously. The detonation is meant to collapse the local space-time entirely, create a singularity, a hole in causality that swallows the temporal distortion and seals itself." I asked if that would work. Klein's hands trembled more violently. He gripped the edge of the table to steady them. "We don't know. The mathematics suggest it might. But we've never tested it because testing requires creating the exact conditions we're trying to prevent. And there's a complication." He pulled up another file. This one contained surveillance footage from inside Site 17, dated 3 months prior. The timestamp showed footage from a hallway outside what I assumed was Wang's containment area. A figure walked down the hall, male, wearing a lab coat, moving with purpose. The figure's face was visible. It was Klein, 20 years younger. The footage showed him entering Wang's room, remaining inside for 43 seconds, then exiting and walking back down the hall. "I was not at Site 17 that day," Klein said quietly. "I retired in 2007. I've not set foot in that facility in 19 years. But there I am, on security footage, entering Wang's containment area. The guards remember me being there. The logs show my security badge accessing the room. But I was here, in Arizona, 1,500 miles away." He opened another file, more footage. Klein appearing at Site 17 on different dates, always alone, always entering Wang's containment area. Sometimes the footage showed him older than he currently was, sometimes younger. In one clip, dated 5 years in the future, Klein appeared elderly, barely able to walk, supported by a cane. He watched that footage with an expression of absolute certainty. "The temporal field is not just expanding spatially," he said. "It is expanding temporally, backwards and forwards. People who will be exposed to it decades from now are experiencing the effects now. People who were exposed decades ago are experiencing effects that have not manifested yet. Wang, Torres, and Yates are not just victims. They are transmission vectors. And everyone who has ever interacted with them, everyone who ever will interact with them, exists in a state of quantum temporal superposition." I asked him why he was telling me this, why he had agreed to meet me. Klein stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of copper and blood. "Because in every version of this conversation I've remembered, you ask me that question. and in every version, I give you the same answer. The Cascade Protocol will be initiated. I do not know when. It might have already happened. It might happen tomorrow. Time is not linear for us anymore. We are all downstream from Wrocław, from the moment those scientists punctured the membrane. Everything since then, every decision, every conversation, every moment, exists in a state of flux. He turned to face me. His eyes held something I can only describe as temporal vertigo. You are going to write about this. You are going to publish it. And most people will dismiss it as conspiracy theory, classified disinformation, creative fiction, but some will recognize it as truth. Some will ask the right questions, and those questions will lead them here, to this moment, and I will tell them what I am telling you. The bell was never shut down because it cannot be shut down. It exists outside causality. The Germans did not build it. They found it in the sub-basement of that facility, buried in rock formations dating back 200 million years. They excavated it, activated it, and in doing so, they opened a door that has always been open because time does not work the way we think it does. Klein handed me a USB drive. Everything is on here. The files, the footage, the data. You will take it, you will study it, and you will understand that what happened in Wrocław was not an experiment gone wrong. It was first contact, not with beings from another place, with beings from another when. And they have been trying to communicate with us through the only medium that transcends causality, time itself. I left Klein's trailer as the sun disappeared below the horizon. In my rearview mirror, I watched him return to his folding chair, raising the binoculars to scan the darkening desert, watching for something, or remembering watching for something, or preparing to watch for something. The distinction had ceased to matter. The USB drive sits on my desk. I have not opened it yet. I know I will. Or I have already opened it, or I am opening it now in a moment that exists simultaneously with this one. The temporal contagion spreads not through proximity, but through knowledge, through understanding. And by reading this, by knowing what happened at Wrocław, you are now downstream too. We all are. We have always been. We will always be. The bell is still ringing. Listen closely. You can hear it in the spaces between moments, in the gap between memory and experience, in the silence where past and future collapse into an eternal, impossible now.